The Institute for Governance Reform, IGR, an independent national think tank working with ordinary citizens and a variety of stakeholders to bring high-quality evidence into policy making, yesterday launched a report titled Overcoming State Underperformance: How Incentives Can Accelerate Growth and Stability in Sierra Leone. The report explores the possibility of improving political stability and increasing productivity through incentivizing public officials and making state institutions effective. This morning, to talk about the report, we have Andula Vali, the Executive Director at IGR. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, viewers and listeners.
Good morning, Andy.
Yes.
So Sierra Leone has been independent over 6 decades, if one could say. And of course, the country has experienced economic booms and crises. From a historic perspective, how would you describe the current state of governance and economic performance of Sierra Leone?
Thank you very much. You know, it's useful to know that I would say 3 significant things are happening, not only in Sierra Leone but around the world. There is a shrinking aid. I mean, we know what happened with Donald Trump and the USAID and all. So the aid space, the foreign aid space is shrinking. And secondly, debt is rising. And because of that, thirdly, for countries like ours, we need to be more effective. In fact, that explains why we in fact decided to do this study on overcoming underperformance. So because it makes it difficult for Sierra Leone to have the fiscal space, the government to have this fiscal space to invest in the wealthy and you and I. But to your question about the past 6 years, at the moment, the most indicators, if you take one indicator after another, you can see that the pre-war conditions are way better than the post-war conditions. See, for example, the staple food rice. Sierra Leone used to export rice, at least to neighboring Guinea and Liberia. Not anymore. We are a constant importer, and we heavily rely on imported staples nowadays.
So even with the feed salon, there's no much improvement in that area yet?
There could be improvement, but we are still below the pre-war conditions. And I mean, growing up, the school where I attended in Bo, I remember, you know, Sierra Leone was dotted with a number of airlines. We used to have West Coast, we need to have Sierra National Airlines. I think you were very big at the time. And so it was very easy to fly from Freetown to Sevado, from Freetown to Bond in 30-45 minutes. You're in these cities, you run your errands and you're back. Not anymore. So I heard you in your intro talking about the Minister of Information coming to update on the cocaine issue. At a point in time in developing this paper, one of the things we wanted to really dedicate the paper on was cocaine. Why cocaine? But we decided not to do that because we believe it's part of the larger issue of state underperformance that we actually needed to deal with. So that's really is the biggest driver of this paper, because if the state becomes effective, and when I say state effectiveness, we're actually talking about the effectiveness of parliament in overseeing the executive, the effectiveness of the judiciary in delivering justice. We noticed that in 2018, since President Bio came to power, one of the things that was instituted was what we call the GTT report, the Government Transition Team report. There are a few things that were criticized at that time, and now they are in anecdotal evidences that they have been embraced and they have been done. I mean, so what is clear that underperformance of institutions cannot be attributed to one political party. It's actually systemic, so we need to really study it and understand what are the drivers. So the report really stated a number of drivers for underperformance, and we mentioned incentives, so there are clear incentives that can be utilized. Looking at we did a multi-country study to understand what have been the incentives used in other countries to overcome the underperformance that we're having, at least to make justice and parliamentary oversight more effective.
You know, your report also suggests that these Sierra Leone institutions that you've just mentioned, the judiciary, the parliament, and of course civil service, tend to serve the elites more than the general public. Do we need an overhaul of these institutions, a general overhaul?
So it's interesting. So we identify 5 causes of state underperformance. You've just mentioned one. I think the first one is really executive control. So the executive control of those oversight institutions is so huge. It's happening under APC, it's happening under SLPP. And so the strategy always has been for the executive to change personnel. So when there's a change of government, personnel change without necessarily changing the system that is responsible for the underperformance. So there's this common balance in Sierra Leone where people say, this now we turn. So you know, when there's a change of government, you see jobs and goodies of society being distributed to one end of the society and not the other end. I think that's one. The second one, which is really big, which I would like viewers and listeners to understand, is what is the role of the public? What is the public doing to contribute to state underperformance? Normally when there's a case in court, we say, "Go work at that case day." The last Afrobarometer study we did, 60% of citizens believe that the member of parliament should provide direct support to them. In fact, 79% said they are not doing it.
To them particularly,
to
or
them particularly, you give me money, my auntie is or my mom is sick, how can I go to my MP or an appointed official to support them? So we've accepted this idea that the state, holds enormous looting, opportunities. So politics is just a way of you being at the helm to control the spoils. So because of that, that's how politics has been shaped over time. So that shapes the relationship between politicians and their leaders. It shaped the civic culture of society. So if my brother or your uncle or your nephew or your kinsman is a chairman of the political party, you don't need to worry much about getting good grades to get a government scholarship. I mean, equally, it's the same stewardship that we extend into businesses.
Andrew, your earlier submission paints a very worrying picture. In fact, it's when you look at global aid and its current effects on not just Sierra Leone, but many other nations that do rely heavily on these resources that are coming from abroad. It paints a gloomy picture. But again, help the public at this moment to understand the content of this document, because it does catalog a number of issues that touches directly on the lives and livelihoods of the people.
So definitely, I mean, most of what I've been saying, it can be found directly in the document. So you've seen over time, because of the lack of trust in institutions, the lack of trust as a result of institutional underperformance, we have this situation where we have a too public in the sense you have a public that feel entitled depending on the regime in power, and you have another set of people that feel aggrieved because of the regime that is in power, that they think they feel they are not that they feel is not catering for them. In fact, there's an Afrobarometer question that we ask. We ask the people. It's been a perennial question we've been asking since 2012. Is your ethnic group treated fairly by government? It was 35% in 2012 and 2015, largely in the south and east areas controlled by SLPP, that felt the ethnic group was treated unfairly by government. When we reverse the clock, we ask the same question in 2022, it's exactly 36%, but these are communities largely in the northern area. And why is this important in terms of state effectiveness and state underperformance? It's difficult for Bo and McKinney to come together to demand better electricity, to demand better welfare, to demand, water services, because there is this false belief that this regime is for me, is my regime. So that's one dimension of how, over time we've created a situation where it's difficult for citizens to come together to co-create solutions because they feel tethered to a particular regime.
I could remember during the days of the former president Zanzibar Nkrumah, when at some point in time the township roads within Kenema were about to be rehabilitated. Were about to be, of course, put into proper order. And then many from that end believe at that time that they will not allow that development to come from a president. They will wait until when theirs coming, and then same will be.
Do you believe that?
Come on.
No, there is no one. There is no one. If you say,
but again, this one draws me to point 3 of the report you just published, which speaks about past and present approaches are inadequate. I was just going through it. It drags my mind to most of what was happening and what's happening now, just as you mentioned earlier on, Andrew.
Yes. So in past and present approaches, we actually catalog 3 approaches. One approach by government, one approach by opposition, and the other approach by development partners. And I think I've explained it quite a lot. Ruling parties under SLPP and APC, they seem to have the same approach in terms of addressing this problem. Upon coming to power, instead of addressing the underlying drivers of underperformance, they always think about the next election. And in thinking about the next election, there's always this fear that if I begin to attack these underlying causes, I'll be distracted from winning the next election. So we've got situations where there's this abiding faith that maybe, just maybe, I'll achieve those objectives without actually reforming the institutions. So you change personnel, but the delivery system remains the same. We've had situations, in fact, it's reflected in the reports, where we've had very good people that are excelling in agencies and institutions abroad. They bring them into our context and culture, they fail. So we have, there's a whole professor in peace studies that was at the helm of the SLPP affairs. The first inning, he couldn't deliver peace. There was a whole professor, not only a professor, but an accomplished practitioner in agriculture under APC. He was appointed as the Minister of Agriculture, but he couldn't deliver.
Right. I think he's now late, Montin Jones.
I have not called any name.
No,
So we have this situation. So and because of that, we face this perennial situation, this constant situation of institutions failing. And
where do you think we keep getting it wrong?
So that's the thing. It's the failure to address the underlying causes of underperformance. It's the same with the opposition. The opposition strategy and the ruling party strategy seems to be the same, because the opposition, all what they want to change is the personnel, not to change the system. So that's why they hardly criticize the system, because what they want to do is to inherit the machinery.
And then get benefit from it.
And get benefit from it.
But one would want to ask, are these 2 political parties really a good for the nation? Because it seems it's a pattern, as you've mentioned. It's one party for another. After the APC, we've seen the SLPP. They are the 2 largest, I would say, political parties. And I believe we're at a point where even the younger generation in Sierra Leone, and Sierra Leone is made up of a youthful population, they're hopeful and looking forward to how they will get food on their table, how the basic necessities, one can access it with your hard work and labor. You could be able to get EDSA, you could be able to, get your gas refilled, you're able to use internet. These are just what a lot of other young people want. But it seems it's a trend as well. As we're growing up, you also have people who tend to step into some of these footprints set by political parties. And if you want to survive, sometimes not everyone is able to be strong enough to say, okay, I've got my integrity, I should work on this and all of that. Some people are easily swayed by external influences. So are these 2 political parties really a good for Sierra Leone?
The problem is not with the problem with not with the political parties alone. So there's a challenge with civil society, there's a challenge with the media, and there's a challenge with development partners as well. In fact, one of the things we discussed, I only hope by publishing papers like this, it becomes a source of reflection as to how political parties can change course, redirect, change approaches, because what we reflected upon, it's always okay to talk about scandals, though there is corruption, there is, you have this cocaine issue, but it's always good to step back to see what is driving this, how can we address the underlying causes, and that's what this report is actually saying. For example, on the donors, there is always this belief that maybe one of these sides is better than the other. And because of that, sometimes there is a belief that, no, maybe if we change regime, maybe something better will happen. So what has emerged out of that, we have a situation where both SLPP and APC accuse development partners of either regime change or regime protection. So, and we categorize donor responses into three. There is the first one, which is they provide aid, they provide direct support in terms of logistics, and we've even seen what they call PIUs, project implementation units, established within MDAs, and they are meant to circumvent, the bureaucracy that they cannot change. Say, for example, the culture in civil service that they cannot change. So let us just circumvent that and deliver results. But what we clearly see from that strategy, the moment you pull out, the condition remains, because you have not changed the condition.
Right.
The second approach is normally they use what they call funding levers. If you provide this water, I'll give you 100,000. If you provide another water, I'll give you. And normally it's called like policy-based lending, and so when it becomes a box-ticking exercise, where the donor recipient, the donor begins to measure their performance on the basis of the absorptive capacity of the state. Say, Sierra Leone is now taking 80% of the budget. It becomes a box-ticking exercise. So clearly you see that you do not reform, but you've made a budget transfer or resource transfer as a condition. So you know what normally happens? Those tenants reappear even when people qualify. I remember I think it was in 2013, Sierra Leone was struck off the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, because of the massive fraud in the extractive regimes at the time. And then it became a condition that the passage of the Access to Information Law should be one of the triggers, and then we pass it. And then definitely the President Nkrumah's platform, financial platform, was threatened at the time, so that made it buoyant. We don't have access to information. We have access to information law, but there are certain information you can't access. And then we actually passed the MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, because we fulfilled most of the conditions. And just at the time we are about to get it, and then we had a situation of the 2023 elections becoming problematic. And then the Americans said, no.
You fix this first.
Yeah, you fix this first. Yeah, before getting this. So we have this situation where we actually need to properly discern what we're calling conditions. But I think those discernments are quite clear for the most part. But what is unclear is how do you evaluate that institutional reform has actually taken place, instead of just saying it's a box ticking.
And just as you mentioned, most times support that does come in form of aid are contingent on, say, Sierra Leone living up to certain expectations. Recently, of course, we saw same with the MCC Compact, that there were a lot of pointers we need to satisfy before same is being given to Sierra Leone. There is an aspect of your report that talks about how Sierra Leone can use incentive for results. Most times, we've seen a lot of incentives being given to Sierra Leone, but the required impact, as you earlier mentioned, is hardly felt on the lives of people.
I think we've used incentive in some ways, but we've never deliberately utilized incentive, as a driver of performance within the public sector. So I can give you an example. If you go to Singapore, for you to work in the public service, they hire the best and the brightest, and corruption levels are quite low. And so because of that, it's the state that believes that I can initiate reforms, and when that reform works, I will extend the stewardship to NGOs, to the private sector. So because of that, so in that report we studied a number of countries that have initiated great reforms. So we looked at India for initiated incentives. We look at India, for example, where they utilize teacher pay to incentivize learning outcomes. So if you, depending on the grades the kids get in the public exams, that teacher will get increase in
their salaries.
In salaries, and because of that, it led to increase in learning outcomes. In fact, if we went to Pakistan, it was interesting. They incentivized what they call their own version of a national revenue authority. So if depending on the revenue that is being collected when there's an increase in revenue, so it's tied to certain incentives. It led to a revenue increase by 13%. So we cannot talk about Georgia. What Georgia did, which for us it's not just an incentive, but it was a broad-scale reform. Georgia fired 15,000 police officers that were deemed corrupt, and they prosecuted 1,000 public officials. And when there was a public opinion survey about the performance of the government, the Georgian government, there was a 60% increase in citizens' trust. So we believe that there could be an opportunity to incentivize the judge, the judiciary, and the Parliament. And first, it starts with we've been talking quite a lot about autonomy, but it really starts with guaranteeing financial autonomy and operational autonomy of those institutions. And by financial autonomy, I mean, how can we have a situation where the oversight budget for Parliament is determined by the Ministry of Finance? The budget for the judiciary is determined by the Ministry of Finance. So we need to face a situation where these other bodies of government become self-sustaining. And there are models that you can see in the reports, say for example in Nigeria, in Kenya. So for judicial incentives, so we cannot have a situation where judges are poorly paid, where members of parliament are poorly paid. And we have this political culture where people expect members of parliament to dole out direct benefits. So if we have that situation, it will become difficult. They say you get what you pay for. I'm not saying we become blind to the concerns around corruption, but how can we ensure that the challenges that these institutions face, if you guess how many judges have vehicles, I mean like official vehicles. So normally what these institutions are left to do is to cut corners. So I think that's the first thing. When I say incentivizing, it's not just about direct material incentives, but you can have non-material incentives through recognition. You cannot have a situation where you can have one judge that will be judging 15 cases per year and another judge delivering 100 cases per year. So the judge with 100 cases delivering 100, I'm talking about the same quality of cases, say for example in criminal prosecutions. The judge that delivers 100 should be incentivized because they are actually delivering more. They are saving taxpayers' monies. So one of the big recommendations in the report is for the judiciary, the Ministry of Justice, to develop an incentive model for the justice system. It's the same with Parliament. Parliament, they pass a lot of bills. I saw the other day, when you look at some of the contracts that have been passed, so you have this situation where mining agreements, there's a 1% mining agreement that is going to mining communities. So why can't 0.2% of agreements, resources from agreement, actually stay in Parliament? So Parliament doesn't need to rely on the executive to give them funds. Or how those funds are utilized will be up for another debate in terms of effectiveness. But first and foremost, we need to guarantee the financial and operational autonomy of these institutions. And there are many jurisdictions where this is working.
You just mentioned reforming the financial operations of some of these institutions, and this also draws us or takes us back to the Constitution, wherein a lot of these provisions were made, giving excessive power to the executive. At a time like this, do you think the constitutional review is necessary?
Yes, I think it's up. I don't know, I think we're doing something about it this year. But, you know, beyond just the constitutional review, there is need for us to see how do we improve situations. Because Tijan Kaba, President Bio, President Nkrumah, they all operated under the same constitution, but the leadership styles are different. So I think it's really about how do we have the two political parties actually agreeing on how can institutions function. I mean, this report, we actually concluded very well with Duncan, who suggests that when you look at growth in many countries around the world, it's not the ideas, the initiatives of these countries, of the leaders of this country, but it's the cooperation that they forge. So if SLPP and APC do not come together to say we need justice, we need an effective parliament, we need water, it will be difficult. So if institutions keep sticking to their positions, I mean, if you and I we have in the political situation, and you stick to your posture, you impose a unilateral solution to the problem, we cannot move forward. So that's really the big call. We can talk about all of these things all day, I mean, for all you care, but until we have a situation where diverse political parties and interest groups say this is the kind of country we want.
And your report speaks to several realities on the ground. I was just thinking of the multiplication, or better put, duplication of many governments, ministries, departments, and agencies in country as to their roles and responsibility. Of course, one will say any country that wants to develop needs to usher in the required reforms. But again, take for those ministries, departments, and agencies that speaks directly to protecting the environment. It is under their watchful eyes that we see abysmal deforestation along the Western Area Peninsula, which sits within Freetown. And yes, indeed, we've seen most of this. Now you have Environment Ministry, EPA is there, you have NPAA, and many others that are there to ensure this once pristine biodiversity is being protected. But results becomes a problem.
So that's why we need to test out performance-based, result-based system, at least in some sectors. We made this suggestion because when you look at the pulse of Sierra Leone, it is difficult for Sierra Leone to institute broader pay reforms because we don't have the resource. But where we can start with incentivizing performance. And by incentivizing, let's say we start with incentivizing performance in Parliament on the justice system. Yesterday when we were launching, there was someone from the Human Resource Management Office, which manages largely the civil service. They were saying, how do we ensure that we extend this to the civil service? But the reality is, we actually need to start with oversight institutions. You can ask, is Parliament, how much pride is Parliament taking to ensure that MDAs implement the audit recommendations that they oversee? How much pride is Parliament taking to ensure that, say for example, the issue that there's a whole parliamentary oversight committee on environment. How much pride are they taking to ensure that they oversee the applications of environmental protocols, or the APA, for example, is being brought to account. So we have this situation where a lot of Sierra Leoneans actually suspect members of parliament that all of the nominees from State House, they go through Parliament, and B, when MDAs come up in their oversight, the tough questions are not being asked. And then there are questions around how much savings is Parliament making. So that's why some of let's say if we challenge Parliament to say, the more you make savings from MDAs, a portion of that savings actually stays to Parliament. Do you know what will happen? Parliament will get better, citizens will get better, because it will block leakages. And so we need to find legitimate ways for institutional leaders to actually get resources without them being accused of being corrupt. When Donald Trump was campaigning in the US, he said, I'll cut taxes for the rich. He was so open about that. And Kamala Harris was very clear. For those that are, first-time home buyers, I'll build 3 million houses. I'll create startup funds, 50,000 first time. If here, when you do that, it's corruption. You're actually providing funds for your supporters. So one of the things that the incentive system does is to say, let us really reduce the stigma of people making money to be seen as corruption. But there are legitimate ways that you can improve society and create monies for yourself. You get recognition without you being seen to be corrupt.
Let's also talk about the societal pressure which you made mention of, and earlier as you were speaking you mentioned it. It's also in your report, wherein it is, you've just mentioned not just those who are in the institutions but us as citizens as well. We also have our responsibilities, wherein it is easy to bribe a judge, bribe a magistrate, or maybe someone who's a law enforcement officer, or use our influence, whether politically and the likes. What responsibilities also lie with citizens? Because in the end, regimes do change, as you've mentioned. So it might favor one person today and tomorrow it doesn't favor you. So how do we move on from this as citizens?
Well, I think it's quite a catch-22 situation. In the first place, there is a trust deficit. A lot of citizens do not believe that institutions really deliver, that institutions go by their mandate. So what citizens go for, they do not go for the public goods. They want public institutions to deliver private goods for them. So you have an institution with the core mandate of delivering justice and fairness. You say divert that or pervert it, direct it towards me. So we use influences, we use classmatism, we use ethnicity, we use township associations. So, it's a bit that person, do you go talk to them for like bend the rules on you. So face a situation where, citizens are making things very difficult for leaders because citizens, we are so much impatient for the right things to be done. We want a judge to deliver decisions in our favor. We want MPs to give us direct material benefits instead of understanding that member of parliament is actually a public official delivering public goods. So because of this huge trust deficit, it's actually created impatience, which I don't know, but I think it behoves the media as well, not only to do, there are many ways to go around that or to address that. It's public education, it can be automation, because automation more and systems development, because if I know as a member of parliament I need to come to work at 10 o'clock, and I have a card to the door that opens at 10. If it doesn't, you can't clock in after 10 with your card, then automation can lead to certain change in behavior patterns. So it's one is public education that will change that over time, because cultural shift is quite difficult to make, and it cannot happen literally overnight. But the reality is, politicians behave or institutions behave in a particular social milieu, and for us to change society, we need to change the way we perceive institutions as well.
And there are many reports or research that IGR has conducted. Let's also talk about readership, or how far some of these recommendations that IGR comes up with, how have they been imbibed by a lot of institutions or citizens over time?
So normally we are always conscious of people in the driving seat of policy, because at the end of the day, we do not measure ourselves by number of reports we publish, but the uptake of our recommendations. So if we do not make people in the driving seat of policy comfortable enough to take on board the recommendation, it's a monumental waste of time. So therefore, in processing this report, we had several meetings with the leadership of Parliament on incentives for Parliament. We had meetings with the leadership of the judiciary, and in shaping the recommendations, because at the end of the day, that's how we measure ourselves. It's not how many times we blast on radio, because there are many indicators that are down. The easiest thing to do is to sit back and then you lambast that these things are going bad. But the most difficult thing is actually to sit back and reflect. Is to sit aside and reflect on solutions. And that's really, I think, where IGR sits as a think tank, profiling solutions. There are many times we could be wrong in some of the diagnostics that we make, in the solutions that we provide, but we treasure engagement with institutions.
Parliament seems to be having a case here this morning that has been put forward by Andrew as ways to ensure they are insensitized in terms of them getting the required finance to carry on with their operations and activities. But again, Andrew, at this particular moment, do you think performance-based financing is one of the ways to go in terms of ensuring that ministries, departments, and agencies in country, giving the required results as expected in their operations and activities?
Obviously, it's one big way to go, given that we do not have the resources to do broad-scale pay reform, pay and compensation reform. So I think we need to have targeted performance-based system, reward systems. And it's not just about financial rewards. It could be about, getting a particular judge that have excelled in maybe cutting down backlog to be acknowledged in the president's investiture in giving awards to outstanding Sierra Leoneans. So there are many ways that you can get people to deliver results. But by and large, we cannot. The HRM was saying, yes, they were quoting figures yesterday at the launch about what is needed to do a complete pay overhaul and pay reforms, which Sierra Leone cannot afford at the moment. So, and given the shrinking of aid, given the rise in debt, we really need to have targeted actions on how to accelerate delivery, how to accelerate performance within the context of the resources that are available.
One would also say these are like external shocks, but every time they happen, countries with very weak foundation, they suffer the most. Is that the case for Sierra Leone?
Yes, so that's why it's always good for institutions to get constant reform. So what a number of organizations are doing, not only government, NGOs, there's quite a lot of learning that is happening. You say this is dwindling, they've cut down a lot of aid for many organizations. What are we going to learn from that IGR? Our funds are cut off as well. It's not just government. How are we learning from that? How do we adapt under the circumstance? So this paper is really about how can governments adapt under the circumstance? How can results be delivered under the circumstance? So it's not just about waiting for shocks to happen, but it's always the knowledge that shocks do happen. We've got Ebola shocks, we've got COVID shocks, we've got the Ukraine, now we have the Trumpian a shock that is happening. So shocks do happen at any time. So it's really the investments that you make in your institution to develop an enduring mechanism to deliver results that really matter. I think that should count more. And to me, it's really the bridge of accommodation that politicians can make, given that no one side can actually address the challenge of Sierra Leone. We have to go across the divide to ensure that, the APC and SLPP have to make justice work. Imagine 2028. Imagine one of the political parties say, I do not accept the election results. And if even SLPP says that, or APC says that, there will be complete disorder. So to prevent that, we have to ensure that institutions work. We have to ensure that consensus has to be made for institutions to work. There's a belief that institutions work for a certain set of people and institutions work against a certain set of people. So we actually need to build that consensus. And what that means, creating openness, making the criteria, say for example for promotions in the judiciary, for you to become a judge, this is the open criteria for you to become a judge. You do not become a judge because you are closer to this party. We create incentives. We have situations, for example, most of the oil contracts passed by the Nigerian parliament, part of those funds actually go to the Senate, the Nigeria Senate, they do not rely much on the executive to finance them. How do we have self-financing mechanism, given the vast library of information available that we can learn from other countries? So nowadays, knowledge is out there. So I think the question is reluctance, and we really need to generate political will. One of the things that's really promising is the fact that political parties sat down and agreed on 80 recommendations. So to me, it contained the seed of renewal, that it's possible for us to strike compromise. And that stewardship has to be extended. So for example, how do we make parliament effective? How do we make the judiciary effective? How do we cut down backlog cases? If we have a judge, for example, or the parliamentary administrator that is effective as cutting down, finances going to a correctional center, the prison, that individual or that unit should be rewarded, because they're actually cutting down costs to government. It's coming from cost to government. If we have a particular agency that is top-notch in implementing top audit recommendation and cutting down costs, that agency should be rewarded. So we cannot be another Singapore, but we need a situation where government can be in position of employing the best and the brightest, and government should be in position of properly rewarding those best and brightest that have been employed.
I think on our Facebook page, Mr. Digdozak says Andrew Lavalley, in the area of Nawiton, even in the US, you'll get more appointments from the people that are in the same party with Donald Trump than the other party. Just that the context of Sierra Leone, we should stop sacking public servants based on their names, their regions, which have been ongoing for decades. I think this is something you've also talked about over time as to the realities in the country.
No, this Nawiton is not appreciated anywhere around the world. That it happens in the US, it doesn't mean it's admirable. So institutions should provide public goods, not private goods. So that's really how the public service works. So you cannot say this now we turn to give scholarships to people who supported a certain political party. This now we turn to give contracts to people who supported certain political parties. It doesn't mean that because it happened in the US, it's desirable. The reality is, in the US, it's not seen to be corruption. I think what we reflected in our paper, because if Kamala Harris won the election, you will have seen, housing, building societies coming up with housing schemes to build houses that will likely be beneficial to, people in the lower rungs of the US. It's not corruption, because she actually promised it in a campaign. It's in political science, it's back channel transfer, to supporters. I am saying that in Sierra Leone, we actually need to stop labeling everything about corruption, but we create an incentive system for citizens that are working hard to be rewarded. And at the same time, you actually face, a bigger equilibrium where the citizens benefit that are working hard, society benefits, and institutions develop.
If you had to outline 3 key steps that Sierra Leone should take immediately to improve governance and the economy, what will they be?
I think it's a difficult question, but I think first and foremost is to ensure that institutions actually work, and this paper is dedicated to that, to ensure that we create financial autonomy of Parliament and the judiciary, and there are clear procedures. Normally we keep crying over judicial independence, parliamentary independence, but hardly do we come up with suggestions or solutions to that. What this paper has done is to really put the information together. I mean, it could be challenged, and that's really that we pride ourselves to face debates on the issues we raise. But that's one. And then the other one is citizen transformation. We really need citizens to change mindset shift, mindset development is big. And that's why really President Bill should not give up on the slogan he had in his first inning, New Direction. New Direction does not mean making more schools. It doesn't mean creating more hospitals. It actually means that you are going in this direction, but it's actually wrong. You need to go this way. So it's how much shifts are we making in terms of attitudes? How much shifts are we taking in terms of mindset, the way we view things, the way the culture in civil service? How much change are we making in that? I think that's big. There needs to be change on the donor side as well, the development partner side as well, and you can see those reflected in the recommendations.
Indeed, thank you so very much, Andrew Lavalley, for your time this morning. He was talking on a recent report which they published yesterday, and it's been titled "Overcoming States Underperformance: How Incentive Can Accelerate Growth and Stability in Sierra Leone." I believe this is a conversation that will continue.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Yes.